This is webinar 122 and we are going to talk about dynamic aspects of a chess game. Okay, while we are waiting for more attendees to come, let me check if everything works properly. Officially the webinar will start in 2 minutes, so that's why there is nobody right now. But I see people joining. The volume is too low. Okay, let me fix it. Just a sec. The volume is too low. Well, I can get it back to this, which is the normal volume, but maybe in this case there will be a lot of background noise. What do you think? By the way, so I'm streaming this webinar on both platforms, Twitch and YouTube. Okay, so what about the sound now? Is it better? Yeah, hello everyone, especially for those who joined our webinar for the first time. Guys, can you please introduce yourself? You can tell which country are you from and what's your ELO. It can be either a feeder ELO or just a chess.com rating. Okay. So yesterday I was playing a match with the chess nerd. Oh, wait a sec. Let me change it. So today the topic is the webinar 122nd, dynamic aspects of a chess game. Okay. So hello David, it's perfect. Your rating is almost 1700. That's really good. You're from the United States, which is also good. Okay, so yesterday I was playing a match with the guy from Canada. He's quite a good player. He has about 2200 chess.com ELO. And the match consisted of 10 games. You can also find it here on my YouTube channel or on my Twitch channel as well. So the match, the formula was the match ends when one of the players scores more than 5 points. So we played 7 games and I won 6 of them. I lost one game, but by time. However, the position was approximately equal and the game would likely end in a draw if I wouldn't lose on time. Well, there were not so many participants watching this match, but I'm sure for those who visited, they really enjoyed it because I was trying to explain the moves. Okay, I have something to share with you, but let's wait until more people to come. And first, let's start about our topic today. Let's discuss it. So the topic is dynamic aspects. How do you understand dynamic aspects or dynamics in chess or dynamic factors in chess? What, in your opinion, it means? Oh, while you are trying to answer this question, I will try to help you with it. So there is static and dynamic, two different categories. And I actually had a webinar where I was demonstrating how to convert your two different types of advantage, static advantage to a dynamic advantage. For example, dynamic advantage was an ability to develop the initiative. And static advantage can just, well, maybe a bishop pair, extra material. Okay, so Parallax thinks that this is a piece play. Yeah, I almost agree with you. It's dynamics is the ability of your pieces to do something, to move somewhere, to initiate a strong attack on the king, to create weaknesses into the enemy camp, or just anything. So the pieces and the pawns, especially the pawns, because it's very often when pawns are blocked and you can't do anything, so the ability of pawns to move is a very important dynamic aspect of their position. So it means you can move the pawns, promote them maybe, or just get them to the center and get better control over the center. Okay. So if speaking about static, it means the number of, let's say the number of pieces already on the board and some static characteristics like, for example, bishop versus knight or something like that, or a bishop pair versus two other minor pieces. But dynamic means the ability of these pieces to do something. And I can definitely say that dynamic is better than static. But the problem is that dynamic is only, and dynamic advantage, for example, is only a temporary advantage, and you can simply lose it in case if you play slow moves. Well, the first game that illustrates it is the game between Yuri Averbakh, nowadays the oldest grandmaster, and Evgeny Bebchuk. If you look at this position, you may say that, wait, black has a outside pass pawn, they are likely to win. For example, if they just let the pawn to move, white king has to stop it and will be distracted. And then black king enters white camps and just captures the pawns, and then black wins. Yes, that's generally it's correct, but here, due to some dynamic factors, white is winning. So what do you think? How white is able to win in this position? How would you play if you were white? I want you to find the winning plan. So Parallax suggests that we should move the king up. Well, no, probably d4. If you move the king, you may lose the game actually. In this position, to be able to win, you should make a breakthrough. So you should promote one of these pawns. How to do this? If you just move the king to d4, he is likely to continue with king c6. And then b5 before the king gets distracted and they enter your camp with king d5. For example, e4, king d6, e5 no longer works because the king is already on d6. So you probably have to, well, maybe h5, but then b5, and the king has to stop this pawn. After that, this king comes to e5 and black successfully wins, and so on. So king d4 is a mistake. So to be able to win, you need to convert your pawn majority into a passed pawn, and you can do it with the e4 move. How to play for black in this position, or either king c6 or king c5, doesn't really matter. Let's say king c6 and then e5, not king d4 but e5, trying to get rid of this pawn. Well, if in this position black just continues with king d5, for example, you can play e6, and with this move you create a protected passed pawn. So what means that the king can't go there to try to capture the flank because you promote immediately. They can push the pawn, but you are able to stop it and capture with the king. For example, king d6, king c4, king c6, king b4, b6, king c4, and so on. So they have to play this move or this move, and then you come and capture the pawn. No, let's say this move, then maybe just h5. The king has to go there, but then you promote. So it goes there and you take this pawn and then win. So king d5 doesn't work. The only thing they have is to capture the pawn on e5. But then g5. Oh, h takes g5, which is actually not required. H takes g5 and wait, h takes g5 is a mistake. So what do you think? How to play in this position? If you just take, the king comes there, and so you can't win the game. The king is able to stop the pawn. So if black captures on g5, white should do something else. What do you think white should do? No, not h5. If you play h5, I think something wrong happens like that. And after f6, they can play just king e6. F takes g7, king comes there, h6, king, well, just b5, and they promote either the b or the g pawn. So f6, and they have to take. Otherwise, you take and promote. So they take, and then you promote the h5 pawn because the king is out of the square of the pawn. It's outside. It can only come to d6. As for these pawns, well, no, you can stop them. King e2, and you successfully stop the pawn, and you promote first. So in case of h takes g5, you just push the f pawn and promote the h. If, for example, king d6, still f6 works. But it's important to learn something here. For example, king comes to e6, f takes g7, king f7, but g takes h6, and now your task is to capture the pawn. For example, they continue with b5. While the pawns are so far, you are able to capture them both. You are able to capture one pawn first and then get back to capture the other pawn. For example, king e4, threatening to take, they have to push, and then just king d3. If e4, they just lose the pawn. And no, e4, king takes b3, you just take the b pawn without any problems. If, for example, they move the king, then king c4 works, and e4 doesn't allow them to promote. You are able to stop the pawn anyway. So in this game, e4, e5 was the only plan that allowed white to win. And that was possible because of the dynamic factors of this position. This king was too far from the king side. If it was at least one square closer, the game would end in black favor. But it was one step away, and white could create a break through and promote a pawn. This is another example of just a similar example, the game fragment between Mikhail Rode and Norman Weinstein. So unfortunately, black didn't find how to win in this position and they lost the game. But maybe you can tell me how to play. If you just look at this position by the first glance, you will definitely say that white is winning because they are able to create a pass pawn on the other flank and distract the king. After that, white king can enter black king side and capture all the pawns. But there is something black has. Guys, of course I'm waiting for your comments. I'm reading them on Twitch and YouTube, so please suggest. e3. Okay, so there was a suggestion of playing e3. So while other people are thinking, let's talk about e3. In my opinion, it doesn't work. So for example, e3, f takes e3. What's the point? Because if you play f4 after that, I can just capture with this pawn. If h4, just don't understand what's the purpose. No, e3 doesn't work. f4 is another suggestion, right? Well, let me first demonstrate what happened in the game. Black decided to play h4, g takes h4, g takes h4, and then white moved their king closer, and after that we can definitely say that white is winning. King e6, a5, king comes to d6, a6, the king is distracted, white king enters the enemy camp and captures the pawns. This is where black resigned. So h4 didn't work, f4 did. So how to continue in this case? No, well, of course, this is the move we should analyze. The other option is to play king to d4. And actually that's it. Because something like a5 doesn't work. B takes a5, b takes a5, then e3, they have to take, then f3, the g pawn takes, and now h4. And this pawn is promoted much faster. For example, a6, king c6, f4, h3, f5, h2, f6, h1, and f7, but there is a queen already, so queen d5, queen takes f7. So a5 doesn't work. We have only two moves. Let's talk about king d4 first. King d4 is played, then e3 is the best. Well, you're threatening to take or to push the pawn and promote. so they have to capture it. Then still f3 works, again they have to capture, and h4. By the first glance you may say, wait, the king is inside, no, the king can move inside of the square of the pawn, but actually this time he needs more tempos because his own pawn is blocking the way. For example, king e4 h3, and if it goes to f3, the king is able to catch the pawn, but it's illegal now, so he goes to f4 and the pawn is promoted. So g takes f4, g takes f4, king d4, e3. If this move, it's still f3 with the same idea to promote the h-pawn. If king comes to d3, then what do you think? How black should play in this position? Well, yes, in this position it's still f3. If g3, just e takes f2 and this pawn is promoted now. If they take, then h4 wins. What else? Actually, that's it. So black could win with such maneuver. So that's why I say that dynamic aspects are more important than static aspects of a position. So for example here, if you just play natural moves, you are likely to lose the game because your opponent has a clear advantage. They have a distant passed pawn on the queen side, but due to the ability of these pawns to move and to convert the pawn majority into a passed pawn, you are likely to succeed. Okay, fine. So the next game we are going to observe is the game played by Carys and Mikhail Batwink. This is quite an old game, and that time they were not sure about the theory and played some weird moves. But this game illustrates that with a few weaknesses in your position, you can still win if only you find a way how to compensate these weaknesses, and instead of just playing this position with the positional approach, you use the ability of your pieces to attack the enemy king, and this is where you are likely to succeed. Okay, so the opening doesn't matter for us, but it was Nimza Indian defense. Queen c2, d5, c takes d5, e takes d5, bishop g5, h6, bishop h4. c5 is one of the most popular moves in this position, and nowadays everyone understands that d takes c5 is the best move. Then g5, and after this, queen a5, black has a strong attack, but just knight e2, and white is able to protect everything. g5 is a weakness. g5 exposes the king side, creates a weakness on g7. d5 is an isolated pawn and becomes the object of the attack, so it's very common when white wins in such positions. However, instead of d takes c5, Carys played castling queenside. That was a critical mistake, and black was able to take the advantage of this critical mistake. What do you think? How to continue in this position? So you're going to suggest the move, but here it's not enough to suggest just a move. You should suggest a plan. It can be 2-3 moves. So just 2 moves will be enough. What to do first, what to do second. Okay, so while you're thinking, guys, I have something to share with you. My friend and I started a chess school. It's an online chess school, and we are going to launch it tomorrow. If you are interested in private coaching, this is one of the best ways to learn something from an experienced coach. So, for example, if you click on coaches, you can find these people, even me. But actually, I do not. I conduct classes for this chess school quite rare because I'm quite busy with my own students. But here we have a grandmaster. We have several international masters, and they are also FIDE trainers. I know they both are really good. For example, Julian has 2 grandmasters norm, and is coaching for maybe 20 years. You may also know this guy from Serbia. He is also working for us. We have some FIDE masters, for the one from Bulgaria, another one from Montenegro, who is also a strong chess player. Candidate master from India. I think he's strong enough as FIDE master. He has also won international master norm, and I know students who took lessons from him. They really enjoyed it. And of course, we have a coach for kids. It's a women FIDE master. It's very easy to book a lesson. For example, you click book your lesson, and this is the schedule. So this is your time zone. Here, for example, I'm in Novosibirsk. It's my time zone. You can just choose your coach. Let's say Mauricio Arias Santana. Choose the time he is available. Like, enter your name and then pay by your credit card. And then 30 minutes before the class, you're going to receive an email with a Zoom link. So everything will be completed automatically. So we are going to announce it tomorrow. However, I decided to demonstrate it for you now. Okay, let's go back to chess. I mean, not... yeah, we were talking about chess anyway, so let's go back to the webinar. So c takes d4. Yeah, c takes d4 in knight c6 definitely makes sense. Yes, I can share the link. Okay, so c takes d4, knight c6. Yeah, this is what you should do. But to be able to weaken the queenside, you have to capture on c3. Another thing you should do is g5. So here, Batwink started with bishop takes c3, queen takes c3. Oh, this move order is not the best, so I would first play g5 to chase the bishop away and then take on c3, because here they could capture on f6, which was still in black favor, but didn't offer enough advantage to win the game. So queen c3, g5, bishop comes there, then c takes d4 with the idea of knight c6. Now, this time they took with the queen, maybe to pressure on this diagonal. maybe because they decided not to fall under knight e4 attack, so knight c6 anyway. And queen e4 was played in the game. That's not the best move, but quite a logical reaction. The queen always goes there to pin and to not fall under the attack. But black continues their attack with bishop f5 and rook c8. So bishop f5, e3. Here maybe a better move could be f3 with the idea to play e4 and to let the king escape finally. But if f3 happened, then queen b6, threatening with queen e3. So for example, e4, d takes e4, king escapes, but e takes f3 check, so king escapes to a1, and in this position just queen b4, and black is winning. White has to exchange, and then knight comes to c2, threatening with a lot of discovered attacks, and white loses the material. So f3 didn't work. They played e3 with the idea to block with the bishop. So rook c8, and now bishop blocks. Well, here I'm sure many of you would love to play with the knight, but the problem is that the knight is pinned, and that's why there is no discovered attack. So for example, if you castle right away, they still capture on f5, then you move the knight somewhere, but they take the rook, so it doesn't work. What do you think? How to continue in this position for black? So here one of the best ideas is to apply discovered attack, but there are two problems. The knight is pinned, and the second one is that the bishop on f5 is hanging. Bishop where? Bishop d7. Or queen d7. What is the best move? No, b5. Well, I don't see the point of b5. So b5, queen b5. B5, queen b5, castle, bishop f5, knight d4. This is probably what you mean. Well, yes and no. What if they capture with the bishop? Then you castle, but now they capture, well, but now they escape to e1. No, not b5, but b5 looks interesting, but no, it's not the best option. So it's much better just to play queen d7. And not bishop d7. Well, bishop d7 is too passive. For example, they move the king away, and what? We have no discovered attack. Well, yes, we can play here, which is actually the only move. Knight e5, but then the bishop comes to b5, and black didn't achieve anything. That's why queen d7. Two ideas. First, to protect. Second, to apply discovered attack. King b1, bishop d3, rook takes d3, and queen f5, pinning them. well, this is where they are in trouble. For example, if they play something like queen a3, you could continue with knight b4 and successfully win the rook. That's why e4. But knight takes e4, threatening with this. King a1 was played. How would you continue in this position? What's left for black to be able to succeed in this strong attack? These pieces are not playing into the game, as well as the bishop on g3. So actually black is attacking with these 4, and white is defending only with these 2. Though there is also one rule that you probably could that you maybe have heard about, or maybe forgot, I don't know. So the rule sounds like that: if you want to succeed with the attack on the enemy king, you should have an advantage of at least a rook. So if we convert the rook to the number of pawns, the rook costs 5 pawns. So here white defends with these 2 pieces and 2 pawns. Black attacks with these 2 knights and the pawn on d5. So this is the exact advantage of 5 pawns if we convert it into pawns. Well, knight c5 is a good move, but they can simply unpin with rook a3 and then maybe queen d1. What else? Knight, what? f2. Well, knight f2 is still rook a3 check, and then they capture on f2 maybe. No, there is something better. b4, you mean b5? Well, b5, queen b5, b5, queen b5. Yeah, I'm not sure of what to continue after that. Okay, guys. Unfortunately, so Eric Ross, yes, that's right, Eric. It's castling. Move number 18. Usually castling is a slow move, but this time it allows us to join 2 pieces into the attack. And now we are threatening with knight c5 at least. Knight f2 as well. Knight b4. So, for example, in the game it was played rook d1. And this is the time to play this move. If, for example, instead of rook d1 they played this, what do you think? How could you succeed here? I just want to remind that I'm reading all the comments on Twitch and YouTube. Well, yes, you can play a defensive move like queen e6 and succeed later in the game, but you can win the game right away. What is the best? No, there are 2 suggestions of knight b4. Well, knight b4 allows them to play queen d1. However, I still believe it's losing position even after queen d1. Knight d4, threatening with rook c1. And knight takes f3, of course, as well as knight c2. That's why rook d1, but now b5. This move was important because we still want to play this move. Now the queen takes, so the queen retreats, we still play knight d4. For example, queen b5, knight d4, the rook has to stay to protect the first rank. And after queen d3, it was knight c2 check, king b1, and what was the last move after which white resigned? Try to find it, please. Knight c3, knight c3, b takes c3. What's the point of this move? No, it's not knight c3. Well, okay, or maybe you can explain the logic of knight c3. I don't see that knight c3 is winning. Well, knight c3, pawn takes c3, and what then? Even if you play this move, I can move the king to a1. Or to b2, for example. Ah, knight a3 first. Well, knight e3, king a1. What else? No, Batwink is playing with black pieces. Paul Carys is white. Okay, guys, let me show it to you. So here you can take the advantage of, yes, thank you, Parallax. Here you can take the advantage of this diagonal if only you get rid of the queen. So knight b4, the queen is hanging, it has to move. Even if it moves there, you can still checkmate in 2 moves. First, double check, the king goes to a1, which is the only spot, and knight c2, the game is over. If, let's say, the queen goes to b3, it's still a checkmate, but this time it takes longer. And then just rook c6, so there is no defense against rook a6. However, after knight b4, they already resigned. So what you can learn from this game, yeah, you can definitely learn that dynamics is better than static advantage. Here g5 exposes the king, d5 is a constant weakness, but the ability of black pieces to create a strong attack on the enemy king decided the game. So if not such moves like bishop f5, rook c8 and queen d7, if black, for example, played something else and castled earlier, they would lose their advantage and wouldn't win the game in this case. Okay, perfect. Let's continue. The next game I would like to illustrate is the game between Vichy Anand and Alexia Shiroff. That was actually a rapid game. So it was French defense. Who knows the name of this variation? Oh, which variation of French defense it is? Oh, it's not advanced. Not advanced variation. It's Steinitz variation. The advanced variation is e5 on the 3rd move. No, and Winawer is bishop b4 in this position. There is d takes e4, which is Rubinstein variation. And knight f6 e5 is Steinitz variation. Knight fd7, knight e2. So here, for example, the most popular move is f4. The second popular line is knight c e2 with the idea to build the pawn chain. c5, c3, so they reinforce the center, knight c6, f4, queen b6, pressuring here and there, which is quite common for French. Knight f3, bishop e7, and a3. Castle. When a3 is played, usually it's played because white wants to play b4, exchange the c-pawn, and grab some space on the queen side. In this position, their king can be safe here or here. Well, b4 is probably the best move, but that was a rapid game, and instead, white decided to play something more active. What do you think? Can you please guess the move for white in this position? Well, g4 right away. Well, this move definitely deserves attention. But how to continue then? g5? Actually, nobody played g4 in this position. Let's look at this move. g4. Ah, that's the problem. They can play f6 and open up the position. Then g4 is likely to be a mistake, because there is no direct attack with after g4. So no, it wasn't g4. Or what else? No, b4 is actually the main move in this position, but Anand decided to play in a different way. Yeah, so h4, but it's not about a pawn crush or a pawn march that I usually suggest when you are castled to the opposite side. But it's about something else. f6 to undermine the position, but rook h3. So this move was played to be able to develop the rook. Nobody develops the rook through the edge, but sometimes it makes sense, especially if the rook does something helpful. For example, on g3 it may attack g7. And this is where, of course, black could play something natural, this move, or maybe this move, which I would play if I were black. But they played knight a5 with the idea to get the control over the b3 mainly, and maybe c4. That was a critical mistake, which allowed white first to play b4. Knight comes to c4, and then knight g3. What's the idea of knight g3? What do you think? What is actually white plan here? If they play rook g3, it was obvious. They wanted to pressure the pawn on g7, but they can't pressure this pawn only with their rook. They have to get more pieces. So with this move, they are trying to attack g7 with the knight, but the main idea is first to develop the pieces. So a5. Oh, actually, a5 was also a kind of inaccuracy. No, I believe f5 is the plan. You mean the plan for black? Well, black can play f5, but in this, yeah, and this is what they actually did. Wait, let me check. Yes, they did it after bishop d3. So first of all, it could make sense for black to apply these simple tactics: f takes e5, f takes e5, knight takes e5, pawn takes e5, knight takes e5, with the idea of queen f2 mate. But of course, nobody forces white to capture on e5 right away. They are most likely to continue with, let's say, maybe knight h5 to protect on f3 with the rook. Maybe develop the bishop. No, well, knight h5 is better, of course. So, and in such a case, black wouldn't have enough compensation for the piece they sacrificed. But for a rapid time control, that could be probably a better decision, rather than to stay under the pressure, which happened later. So a5, bishop d3. Oh, actually here the pawn is pinned, so a takes b4 is not a threat. What can you say about f takes e5 this time? How would you react on this move? So, yes, it's right. It's bishop g7 with bishop h7 with knight g5 coming. For example, bishop h7, king takes h7, and knight g5. No, if they take, we take with the h pawn. Oh, I can show you. H takes. This is a blunder. Queen h5 is a mate right away. So king goes there, then queen h5. And even if the rook escapes, we can play g6. For example, this move queen h8 mate. So if the king escapes, it's f takes e5, and now they have to sacrifice. This is the only way to save the position, because we are going to do this, and the king is checkmated on f7. So to prevent it, they decided to play f5. But when f5 is played, it means that g5 is now for a knight. And another important thing is that now the position cannot be open. And you know, of course, when you are under the strong kingside attack, you have to open up the position in the center to be able to create a counterplay. But this time it's impossible. The only thing black can do is to play on the queenside. Well, the pawn moved to f6 first and then to f5, so there is no en passant move. Knight g5 with the idea to join the queen. And in this position, h6 could lose immediately. For example, if h6 is played, actually, what do you think? What can you do after h6? Queen h5. Well, yes, but first I would recommend you to get rid of the knight, because your bishop is not doing anything, it's blocked. Let's take the knight, d takes e4, queen h5 now. And if they decide to, well, you're threatening with queen g6, queen h7, because if they take with the h pawn, it's still the same story. Now the rook protects the h7 square. And here they may play this move to attack your king. To avoid complications, yeah, you can take, but to avoid complications, you can just play knight e2. Now, the rook is not into the attack only, it also plays a defensive function. It protects on c3 as well. For example, rook a6. And this knight is also protecting the pawn on d4, otherwise queen d4 could be played. So rook a6, queen g6, h takes g5, h takes g5, and that's it. For example, the rook moves, just rook h7. If the rook moves there, it's queen h7 and then g6, with the idea of queen h8 mate, or the idea to capture the rook. So h6 wasn't played in the game, instead they played rook d8. How would you continue in this position? Well, I'm sure you can definitely find this move. Just queen h5. Yeah, queen h5 is the most logical. This move is not a good idea because of queen f7, of course, so that's why bishop has to take. Now, should we capture with the pawn, with the h, with the f, or with the queen? What's your choice? Oh, so here knight e6 cannot be played. There is a queen here, so you cannot play knight e6. But after bishop g5, the question is which piece to take. Okay, so with the h pawn, okay. You mean knight? Okay, I see what you mean. So, for example, instead of this move, knight e6, queen e6, bishop f5, but queen h6 or queen f7. Well, queen f7. Now the queen can't go to h5. You can only play e6, but it's not enough to succeed. It's not a winning position. b4 is hanging. Some discovered attacks can be played as well. No. Okay, so here with the queen, well, taken with the h pawn means knight f8, and they successfully protect it. That's why taken with the f pawn doesn't make sense at all, because everything is closed. So taken with the queen, and now g7 is the other object of the attack. You are threatening with this move, and then either take directly or play knight f6. You can also join the rook. So, for example, if this move was played, then it's knight h5. Something like that doesn't make sense. Just h5. Now, if h6, you can just retreat, then take here and there. So h5 can be played anyway. So, and if rook d7, it's just knight f6. The rook also becomes the object of the attack. So that's why they played this move to move it to f7. Knight h5 and rook f7. Rook g3 to threaten to take. Oh, actually, one more thing I wanted you to understand here. For example, knight f8, knight h5, and if they play something like queen c7, you can just take on g7 right away. Because if the queen gets distracted, the rook is hanging, and something like that doesn't work. It only opens the g file and allows now the rook to join the attack with king f2, rook g3. So rook f8, knight h5, rook f7, and now you suggest knight f6. Well, knight f6 they take with the knight, pawn takes, and then maybe just g6. Oh, no, rook takes f6. Right now it doesn't work. But rook g3 works. g6 is played. So how to continue in this position? This is where you should get more pieces involved into the attack. So knight f6 is one of the suggestions. Well, no, I think I don't agree with you about knight f6. Yeah, I see the purpose. You want to play h5 with your pawn and undermine the g6 pawn, but I'm not sure if it works. For example, queen d8, and after h5, just queen f6. I see you can just take on g6, but then after you exchange the queens, there is no attack, and the number of pawns is equal. How to join more pieces into the attack right now? What do you think? Okay, yeah, it's difficult. It's difficult. So this piece is the bishop. If only the bishop joins, then white is able to succeed. That's why they played b5. Well, they first took on c4 and then played b5 with the idea to activate the bishop. This intervention plays the most important role here. Well, where it? So d takes c4, then b5 with bishop a3. So they played this move, but queen h6. Here, white is combining the ideas of bishop f8 and knight f6 together. For example, bishop comes there, and what's the final tactical strike white applied here? Who can find it? This move was played to not allow the king to escape, as well as to capture the knight if it comes to f8. Well, the queen, rook g6 is the suggestion. What else? Well, everyone suggests rook g6. That's right, rook g6 wins. Rook g6, h takes g6, queen g6. King has to move to h8 only, but queen f7, threatening with a mate. So they play this move. And after bishop f8, black resigned. Why did they resign? First of all, if rook takes, it's a checkmate here. If rook doesn't take, it's bishop g7 and bishop f6, what leads to a checkmate. No, I can show you. Let's say I play some moves, then bishop g7, king h7, bishop f6, king h6, and bishop g5, forcing them to capture with the rook, and this is a checkmate. And if they take with the knight, then it's knight f6, threatening to take here and to play queen h5. So the rook has to move somewhere, but if the rook moves, it's just queen f8. So rook moves to g7, queen f8, and this is a checkmate. If rook, well, yeah, queen f8 is a checkmate anyway. So this is how white won the game. So he was able to win because his pieces were able to initiate a strong attack, and he could find this way of opening the position for the other bishop to be able to involve into the attack, while these two pieces couldn't do anything. Yes, and every time bishop h7 was a threat, which provoked black to play f5, and the 5 only allowed white to initiate a strong attack with knight g5. No, that's not the last game. We have one game to cover. However, before we do this, I would like to demonstrate you something. So, you know, I created a course devoted to how to play Poulsen or Taimanov variation for black. It starts with e4, c5, knight f3, e6, d4, c takes d4, knight d4, and knight c6. And in this position, the key idea is to play queen c7, a6, knight f6, and bishop b4 or bishop e7, depends on how white plays. This is a very sharp opening. And if you want to play for a win with black pieces, together with Can Sicilian, Poulsen Sicilian is a good choice. And I actually already offer this course on my website, so I can share with you. So this is my website, and I'm offering this course. It consists of 8 variations, and for each variation I offer 2 model games. So the course is about 12 hours, if I'm not mistaken, and I cover it there, all possible variations that are played commonly by grandmasters and other strong players. But even if you face with something unfamiliar, I'm sure you are able to find it. So 8 sections, and of course a quiz of how you understand Poles on Sicilian. And actually, I didn't announce sales of this course, but it's a kind of a pre-sale where I offer a 60% discount. So I'm going to share this link with you. If you are interested, then you can enroll into the course today or tomorrow, because then I'm going to introduce this course next Sunday, and I will be offering a discount, but not as high as 60%, of course. Now, if you want to learn a certain opening for black, especially if you enjoy sharp positions and you want to play Sicilian, this is a really good choice. So here you scroll down if you want to enroll in it, then you see the discount, then click enroll in, and if they ask your coupon code, you should use this one, pre-sale. Okay. Let's get back to the webinar, to the topic of the webinar. The last game I would like to demonstrate is the game between Leonid Stein and Vasily Smyslov. This time Vasily Smyslov lost this game. So let's start. c4, knight f6. The opening was really weird. I'm not familiar with it, so they surprised me both players. So e4. If it was d4 or g3 in this position, I would say yes, it's quite common. White plays something like Queen's Gambit or Catalan, and black responds with Nimza Indian. But e4, bishop b7, and queen e2. That was a novelty at that time. Bishop b4 and e5 to chase the knight away. Knight goes to g8. And white occupies the center with d4. Well, in 1974, in the game between Korchnoi and Karpov, it was knight e7, which is actually the best move. But that time when this game was played, they didn't know about it, and black decided to play d6. a3, and now they have to take. Knight e7 now. And this is how white found a way of how to grab the space and try to create weaknesses into the enemy camp. They played h4. You know, when h4 is a very strong weapon when g6 is played on the board, but even if it's not, h5, h6 is still a strong idea that weakens the dark squares on their king side. So, for example, if you are able to play this, then we remove the pawn on g7, and bishop g5, bishop f6 can create serious problems for black king side. Knight d7, h5, and something like h6 was natural, after which I'm sure white would continue with rook h3, rook g3, and attack on g7, but I'm sure black was able to find a counterplay. Instead, black decided to take on f3. That was another mistake. Queen f3, d takes e5. They thought they win an extra pawn with this move, but actually not. h6. White doesn't care about the number of pawns, but plays to create weaknesses into black's camp. G takes h6 was played. Bishop h6, e takes d4, looks quite natural. Bishop g7, the rook has to move. And rook h7 in this position. Well, d3 could be played in this position, but just castle queenside. If d takes c3, then it's just bishop c3 threatening to checkmate on f7. That would be a really strong attack. And then rook d1 with the pin on d7. So knight f5 was played, and I think knight f5 is one of the best solutions here, but bishop takes d4 and the knight is pinned. c5, and what do you think? How to play in this position for white? Okay, so g4. Okay, yes, it's g4. This time it's g4. There is a good question. Why not to play queen h5 after d3? Well, but what's the purpose? d2, let's say. They are able to defend with knight g6 at least. So knight f5, bishop d4, c5, g4. That's right. Knight d6 wasn't enough. So, for example, knight d6, bishop comes to g7, and then rook d1 is coming. So that's why they decided to exchange. But now their king is exposed, or will be exposed in a few moves. To be able to keep the position closed, black played a5. But queen d5, attacking there. Rook f8, c takes d4. Rook c8, another helpful move. It's difficult to suggest a move actually, because they definitely want to move the queen, but every time they move the queen, they blunder the rook. So rook c8. And this is where white could win if only they played castle queenside. For example, queen e7 and then just rook h3 to protect, with the idea of taking on e5 and activating the rooks on the e file, either rook e3 or rook e1, depends on which piece they take with. However, Stein didn't find it. Instead, he played rook d1, which was also a good move, but not good as castle queenside. Queen e7, and just bishop g2. Black tried to attack this bishop with their rook, but it wasn't enough. Here queen comes to b7, attacking the rook. Well, the rook is hanging, they have to do something with it, and that's why they played this. I think queen e8 here is a winning move. For example, queen e8, queen d8, and queen d5 to double attack. They lose a rook. For example, queen f6, queen takes c4. A rook takes g2. But then just queen c8, king moves there, and queen d7. Because if now king takes, it's d takes e5, which gains the queen, and white is a rook up. They didn't notice it, just played knight d takes e5, and they are still winning. After queen e5, the king successfully escapes. And after queen b5, the king comes there. It's a still winning position because the black king is in a trouble. Queen c6 while the bishop is pinned. But queen takes c6, rook takes c6, and what was the nice tactical strike that white applied on the next move? Yes, thanks Tim, it's rook h8, because now if rook takes, bishop takes c6, and then the knight is lost. So they played rook g6, and nothing changed. They played a few more moves then, and only after that black resigned. So what can you learn from this game? You can definitely learn that the dynamic is better than your static advantage. You can create weaknesses into your camp, but while you are threatening and forcing your opponent to defend, you at least are compensating the weaknesses that you already created yourself, and you are more likely to succeed, because it's always difficult to play under the pressure. For example, here after g4, I'm sure white is completely winning, and it's really hard to find a proper move for black. Yeah, so keep the tempi. That's right. With every move, you should create a threat and force your opponent to defend. And this is how, with your dynamic factors, you can compensate the weaknesses that you have already in your position. Okay, guys, that's all I wanted to share today. Please do not miss my next webinar that I'm going to announce next Sunday. Also, you can always email me at tricksofchess@gmail.com. So if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask me. I conduct the webinar every Sunday. Hope to see you next Sunday.